Hi, I'm Mike, and welcome back to The Nerd Is In. In this video, I'm going to show you how to read from a simple text file instead of from the console in C++. There are a couple gotchas, like where is my file and why can't my program find it? And how do I read an entire line of text? But that's just bonus material. The basics are straightforward, and I'll have some timestamps in the video so you can jump to the parts you want. So come on and take a look.
All right, so in this example, reading from a file, we're going to be reading our data for the program from a text file instead of a console, instead of the keyboard. So instead of CN, we're going to be using FN for file in. Couple things we have to worry about with that is what is the format of my file. So here is my data file. It's pay.txt. I just used Notepad to create it. Bubba is the name of the first employee. He worked 40 hours and then his pay was $7.25. So we have three pieces of data for each employee. You might call that a record. And then we have Hank, and then finally we have Michael. Now, when you're reading data from a file, you're going to have the same issues you have with what we call white space. So white space is if I was to say this. If I want to read the name Michael Jordan, if I was doing a CN into a string, it would read Michael into the string, and the white space would say that's the end of the string. It wouldn't get Michael Jordan. So if I'm reading from this file, my program will hum along perfectly until it gets to here. And then since it only read Michael, when it tries to read in the hours, it's going to try to read in Jordan, which is not hours, is not a number. It's going to fail and it's going to be stuck here, and I'm going to get into an endless loop. There is a way to read a whole line of a file, but that is a different command. And I will show that to you at the end of the program. So right now I want it to be Michael Jordan, not Michael Jordan. I just want it to be Michael. And that is my data file. So my inputs are name, hours, and pay rate. And my outputs are going to be name, hours, pay rate. But I'm also going to calculate the pay for that person, which is hours times rate. Now, another very common issue you have to deal with when writing a program, and this is especially for beginning students, never done it before, is when you go to try to open that file, the program is not looking for the data file where you think it is. So the open will fail because you're not looking in the correct location for that file. So my players in this program are name, which I'm going to input from the file, hours and pay rate. I'm going to calculate the pay on this paycheck, and then I have to create a file stream and point it at the file I want to open. Now I'm calling this FN as in file in, so that's almost like CN. I just made the name very simple. Now to create an input file stream, I had to include fstream. Okay, so you have IOStream included, and using namespace standard, that's the same. We're just adding file stream to the headers at the top, the includes at the top. Now, before I actually get into the program, let's look at a couple details of opening the file. If you're not sure where your program is trying to open the file, when you go to open the file, you may want to do something like this. You may want to say E:\\\, and then the name of the file you want to open. So that's going to tell it to look at your memory stick. So E could be your memory stick. Maybe it's disk drive F. I don't know. Whatever drive letter it is in Windows, you need to point it at it. And then you need to make sure you put pay.txt in the top level folder of it. Now, say you're trying to open pay.txt, but it's in your documents folder of your Windows computer. So in that case, you would say file open, fin open. That's the name of my file handle right here. You see it's fin. So I want to open that file, but I want to open the file at location C:users. The username on the computer is Bubba in this example. That's not really my username. Documents, and then pay.txt. So you have to point it at the correct location, otherwise it will not find it. Either that, or you've got to make sure you put the file in the folder where the program is looking for it. And I'll show you how to check your working directory, your current working directory, at the end of the video. Now, the last issue I want to get into is the way C++ handles backslashes. If you were to just type one backslash in here, C++ would say, hey, what is \u? Is that a special command? If you want to put a backslash in your string, you have to go \\\, because if you remember, \t means tab. \n means new line. So there's a lot of these special escape characters, and the letter, the symbol, whatever you type after the backslash has a special meaning. So to get a backslash in your string, you must type 2 backslashes. So I just wanted to mention that when you're trying to write your path to the folder where you want to open pay.txt. Now, with all those preliminaries out of the way, let's look at the code. And the code is not that complex. First, we're going to try to open the file. So in this case, if I'm trying to open this file, my file stream, fin, I'm going to open pay.txt. But remember, I basically have no idea where it's trying to open pay.txt. Well, actually I do, because I have some experience with Microsoft Visual Studio, and what Visual Studio will do here, let me go get the File Explorer up. What Visual Studio will do is your current working directory is the subfolder of the project. So here's all my C++ code. This project is called Reading from a File, and then inside of Reading from a File we have another folder called Reading from a File, and here's pay.txt. So if you're just going to say pay.txt, you have to make sure your data file is right here in the subfolder of the project with the name of the project. So this can be problematic because you're not saying where the data file is. It would probably be better to say // and have it on your memory stick or something. But we'll just leave it like this. It will work. And then as a protection, I'm going to say, did I fail to open the file? If filein.fail is true, I'm going to output a message and exit the program by doing a return. And in this case, you might, instead of saying return 0, you might say that, 2, if you return a 2, that means we couldn't open the file, or if you return a 1 or some error code. You could make it an error code. 0 typically means no error, so I'll leave that as a 1 and hit my favorite button, Save All. Now, if we get past this, now we can read from the file as if we're doing cin, as if we're reading from the console. So if I say fin, because remember, that is the name of my file stream, that's going to read one string from the file and put it into string name. So, we've done this, cin, but we're not reading from the console, we're reading from the file. So we want it to be filein. Now, this is my priming read. I'm going to do my first input before I go into my while loop. And in my while loop, at the top of the while loop, the first thing I'm going to do is check for EOF, end of file. So fin, filein, EOF. EOF is a function that returns true or false. If you have hit end of file, it returns true. So we say, while not end of file, keep looping. Now you just do the first input of the record. Remember, there's 3 lines per person. So this fin string name is going to just read in Bubba. Now, if we get past EOF, now we got to read the rest of the data for Bubba. So these two reads is going to read in hours and pay rate, and in this case it's going to read in 40 for the hours and $7.25 an hour for the pay rate for Bubba. Once we got that read in, we'll calculate the pay, which is hours times pay rate, and then we do a series of couts. We could open a file for output and write this to an output file, but in this example I'm just trying to read from a file. So now we've read from the file, we've done our calculations, we've done our output, we're ready to move on to the next record. So at the bottom of the loop, I read the name of the next person. So at the bottom of the loop here, when I do this FN string name, now I'm going to be reading in Hank. And if that does not trigger into file, then I'm going to read in Hank's hours and Hank's pay rate, and so on and so on and so on until I get to the end of the file. Now in this example, I have 3 records, Bubba, Hank, and Michael. But of course, it could go on and on and on. So let's just watch the program run. I'll just come up here to the triangle to run a local debugger of my current console project. And it's going to pop it up in another window, which let me drag on the screen so you can see it read in Bubba 47.25, and his pay was $290. Hank worked 40 hours at $12.50 an hour. He got $500 for the week. And Michael worked 10 hours at $500 an hour and got $5,000 for the week. And then, as usual, when you're in Windows, you have to press any key to close that runtime window. So that's what the program does. Now, as soon as I get out of the loop, I just need to close the file I've opened, because a file handle is operating system resources. And if you're holding that file open when you don't need it anymore, that's a very bad habit. In fact, some operating systems will have a limit on the number of files that can be opened, and your program's just going to continue to keep that resource and keep that file locked so nobody else can manipulate that file if you don't close it and your program's still running. So anyway, just details are details. Now let's step through this with the debugger so we can see it working. So I'll just put a breakpoint right here by clicking in the gray margin on line 49, and I'll start my program, and it's going to run all the way up to just before it's doing the file open. So let's see if this works. I'm going to use my step over. Here we go, step over. Drum roll. Did I open the file successfully? Yes, I did. And I know it was successful because it skipped over this part right here. So now we're ready to do our first input. So right now string has nothing in it. You can see it's an empty string with double quote, double quote. As soon as I say step over, now we have Bubba in there. We've read the first line of the file. Everything's looking good. We're not going to have into file. We do not. It stays in the loop. So now we just read hours and pay rate. We're going to calculate the pay. So his pay is $290. Now we're going to do some couts. Bubba's pay, his hours, his rate, and his pay. We get that cout. So now to this point, we have processed the first record. Now, if I continue on, now it's going to read in the second name. See, right now it's still got Bubba in it because I have not run this line of code. As soon as I hit step over, now it read Hank. So now we're on to quote the second record. They're not really records, it's just a text file, but you can think of these 3 fields of information as a record for Hank. So we've read Hank in successfully. We have not hit the end of file, so when we jump back up to the top of the loop, EOF is going to be false. This is going to return false, so not false is true, so it will stay in the loop. Then we're going to read the hours, so you see we got 40 and $12.50 an hour. So now we have read all of Hank's information, and going to calculate Hank's pay. and do the outputs. And if I look at my console window, we can now see we have the output for Hank. Continuing on at the bottom of the loop, it's going to read the first part of the next record. So now we just read Michael. That is not into file, so it's going to stay in the loop and read Michael's hours and pay rate. So we have 10 and 500. And if we keep running here, we have processed the 3 records. We have read every bit of data in the file. We're at the end of file. So what's going to happen now is when it tries to do this statement, this is going to trigger end of file. Because you see right now with my yellow arrow, it has not run this line of code yet. I'll hit step over. It's going to go back up to the top. End of file is going to be true. So not true is false. This will make it drop out of the loop. And then I close the file and exit the program. So that is the end there. And that is the basics of reading from a text file. Like I said, there are issues about locating my file. Where is my data file living? So let's see where the program's actually running from. Well, I've got some code down here. We've got to use a function from direct.h called _get current working directory, and it uses a C style string instead of a C++ string, but those are some details that are beyond the scope of this program. But let me just throw this code in here real quick so we can see what our current working directory is. Let me pause things here. All right, so I added direct.h to the top here. I created a character array of 300 characters, and which is more than enough for the file path. And then I called _get current directory and put that into the buffer and did a cout. So if I run the program here, we'll see what my current working directory is as soon as I run this line of code. So I'll hit step over, and you can see that it's quite a mouthful. I'm in users, username, documents, the nerd is in, code, C++, reading from a file, reading from a file. So that is the folder where the program is actually running from, and that's where I am right here, and here's pay.txt. So that's why I've got to have pay.txt in this folder, or it will not find it. Now, alternatively, when you go to open the file, like I said, you can just pick the directory by explicitly saying, okay, it's on my memory stick, which is //pay.txt. And remember, you got to put a double backslash in a string to get one backslash in the string. So my file is not there, so I can leave that alone. And I also recommend that you do have this, because if you can't open the file, you do want it to print out a message so you have some clue that it couldn't find the file, that you didn't put the file in the correct location. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about at the end of this video is if you have a situation where you're trying to read from a data file where you have strings that include white spaces, space, tab, new line. In this case, we want to read the entire line Bubba Smith, not just Bubba as the string. If I do file in string name and I'm reading this file right here, it's going to read Bubba, and it's going to leave this unread because that white space means that's the end of the string when you're using cin or fileIn. To get around this, we can use a function called getLine, which will read the entire line, and then it will discard the carriage return line feed, the new line at the end of the line, for the next input. Now the problem is when we read 40 and we read 725, it's going to read that it's going to leave that new line in there, which is going to cause us a problem when we go to read the next string with getLine. So let me revise the code here. I'll pause the program and I'll talk you through it. What I've done now is I've commented out my fn string name, which will only get to the first white space, and replaced it with getLine. So getLine will read the entire line of the file. So if I say getLine, that's going to read Bubba Smith all the way into string name from my file stream. So everything is the same here. It's a one-for-one exchange, but we get into a little bit of a quirk when we're using getLine versus fn or cn, because these fn's right here are leaving the new line in the data stream unread. And that will, when I do the second getLine to try to read Hank, it will get stuck and get an empty string, and then we'll get stuck with these others. It'll be a problem with the program. So we actually have to do in the loop, just before we say getLine, to read the second name, is we have to tell to ignore that new line character and throw it away. So this is what we're doing to read an entire line of text instead of just using fn. So that will let us read Bubba Smith instead of just Bubba with the fn, and Michael Jordan instead of just Michael. So it is some detail, some nuance you got to work with. So if your professor is trying to make you read a file like this versus just a single name, then that's what you've got to do to get around it. Now, to use getLine, remember you need to include string. So let's run the program here and we'll see it work properly to read these full names. So we've gotten the file open. We're getting ready to read in the name. I'll hit step over. So now you see it read the full Bubba Smith with the getLine. We'll tell it to continue. Single step. So now I've read 40 hours at $7.25 an hour, calculate the pay, do my outputs. So everything is looking good here. We're ready to go through the second time of the loop. We have to get past that new line by saying fn.ignore, tell it to step over. Now it reads in the next string, Hank, so it's happy. We come back around, it's not into file. It reads in Hank's hours and pay. We calculate his pay, and you can see the output right there. Everything's looking good. Now we're going to get on to Michael Jordan. We just read Michael Jordan from the file using getLine. We're going to come back around. We're knotted into file. We'll read his hours and pay rate and calculate all that and output it. So now if you look, we've processed the 3 records. We're getting ready to hit into file. So we try to read another string. That's going to trigger into file, jump us out of the loop. We close the file and we close the program. So that is reading from a file instead of CN, with some bonus material to talk about gotchas. If you like this program, please like and subscribe to get further videos on C++ and C#. Thanks a lot.